Okay, so welcome along everyone that has joined in this morning. This is the first of four seminars that we're doing this week on breeding related topics. So today we have Stephen Moore from Moorepark and Donal Patton from Ballyhaise. Stephen is going to give a presentation on maximising in-calf rates during the first 3 weeks of the breeding season, how we go about that and the logic for doing it. And then Donal is going to give us some insights into the plan for the Ballyhaise Research Farm as to what they're going to do this season. Okay, so I'm going to hand you over to Stephen Moore. Stephen is a researcher in Moorepark, has been there with a good number of years. Is from just outside of Monagea in County Limerick, outside of Newcastle West in County Limerick, and has been working on dairy cow fertility with a long number of years and has some experience from the States, research work in the States also. So I'll hand you over to Stephen for about 10 to 15 minutes, and we can take questions then through the text system for at that stage, and then we'll move on to Donal after that. Thank you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks, Stuart. So for this morning seminar, I'm going to deal about how to maximize in-calf rates in heifers and cows during the first 3 weeks of the breeding season. So, second, get this moving. So in pasture-based systems, we have set really high fertility targets to maximize the profitability of our system. So we have a 3-week submission rate target of 90%, and this is critical to achieving a high 6-week calving rate target of 90% also. We do this so to maximize our compact calving season, which allows for long lactations and high levels of milk production. But we know from ICBF national herd data that in the average herd, only 71% of cows are submitted during the first 3 weeks of the breeding season. 78% of heifers are submitted during the first 3 weeks. And during the calving season, then only 65% of cows are calving during the first 6 weeks. And we know from economic analysis by Lawrence Chalou and Moorepark that this average performance is reducing milk or profit per cow per year by €206. And if we look at the graph to the right of the screen, we can see the trends in recent years. And there have been some improvements in fertility performance in recent years, but we know there are just to illustrate that we're quite a bit off the 90% targets that we have set for our system. So what do we do about increasing the in-calf rates? So the main limitations to a high 3-week in-calf rate are a poor submission rate and poor conception rate. The submission rate is going to be negatively affected by having a large number of non-cycling cows that are not showing heat, but also poor levels of heat detection on farm. And one of the major causes of poor conception rate is uterine disease. So the plan that we have put in place to increase the 3-week in-calf rate are to begin from about 3 to 5 weeks before mating start date. The first thing to do is to body condition score the entire herd, and this is done to identify cows that are in a low body condition score. So these are animals with a body condition score of 2.5 or less. So we know that cows that are thin pre-breeding are going to have lower submission rates and lower conception rates. So we need to increase body condition score on these animals to at least 2.75 and greater. So for these animals, thin cows, we are recommending putting them on once-a-day milking until at least 3 weeks after they have been submitted for AI. And this is to give them the best chance of maintaining that pregnancy. The next step then is to identify the cows in the herd that are non-cycling. And this is going to involve a period of pre-breeding heat detection or else a pre-breeding ultrasound scan. And then the cows that have not been cycling during this period and that are at least 30 days calved, they should be synchronized so that they can be inseminated at mating start date. We do know that there will be a proportion of those cows that won't be suitable for a synchronization for mating start date because they won't be calved long enough. But there will, as time progresses, there should be a second group of cows that are that once they pass 30 days calved and haven't been submitted, they should be synchronized so that they can be submitted on day 21 of the breeding season. You need to be maintaining excellent AI records and uploading them to the ICBF. In most cases, this will be done by electronic handheld, but otherwise you should do them manually. And you should be monitoring your submission rates weekly. If you're not on target for 30% submitted by the first week, 60% by the second week, and by the third week, for the animals not being submitted and get them into action so that they will be submitted as soon as possible. You know that there's going to be a group of cows in the herd, and these might need some priority for action. And these are cows that will have had calving issues, health issues earlier in the spring. These are with a low fertility subindex, and cows in particular that are late calving. So calving late March throughout April and maybe even into May. So I'll spend now a bit of time going through the Metrichecking to identify cows with a uterine infection. So the Metricheck device is it consists of a rubber scoop that is placed in the vagina to collect the mucus. And this is scored then to identify cows with a uterine infection. It is important when Metrichecking, so hygiene is really important. And in practical terms, this is going to mean having at least 2 buckets of clean water with disinfectant. 1 bucket for cleaning the vulva before the Metricheck is inserted into the vagina, and another bucket for cleaning the Metricheck between each cow. So then what do we do with the samples that we collect with the Metricheck device? Well, they need to be scored, and the scoring system goes from 1 to 5. So if we look at the slide, we can see that clear mucus with no pus is a score 1. And so these are cows with healthy cows with no uterine infection. A score 2 is mucus with flecks of pus. A score 3 is mucus with less than 50% pus. Score 4 is mucus with at least 50% pus, and score 5 is mucus with more than 50% pus and a foul smell. So we are recommending that animals with a score of 2 or greater should get a Metricure intrauterine antibiotic to increase conception rates. So then what to do with the cows that are non-cycling? And the best plan for these is to put them on a timed AI protocol. And this is for the cows that have not been cycling. And the protocol that I will go through allows for AI at a fixed time and without any requirement for heat detection. And the protocol takes 10 days to implement. So, and it begins with 1 shot of GnRH and the insertion of the progesterone device. And then 3 days and 2 days before insemination, each cow gets a daily injection of prostaglandin. And the progesterone device must be removed 2 days before AI to make sure that the cows come into heat. Then 32 hours after that second shot of prostaglandin, so that will be the evening before insemination, all of the cows need to get a shot of GnRH to make sure that they ovulate. And with this protocol, insemination should occur 16 hours after that shot of GnRH. And with this protocol, it involves 5 interventions with 4 injections and 1 progesterone device. And the drugs involved, their trade names are being named at the bottom of the screen for you to check out. So I just want to talk a bit about I guess heat detection once the breeding season commences. And we know that poor levels of heat detection are a main reason for poor submission rates on farms. So we have done some work in Moorepark to monitor when cows are coming into heat during the breeding season. And as you can see from the figure, cows come into heat at all hours of the day. But we know from our analysis that on average heats are lasting for only 8 hours. And in fact, 55% of cows are being mounted for 8 hours or less. So that is why we are really recommending that there are at least 3 periods of heat detection daily with the use of a heat detection aid to maximize submission rates. We also have noticed that cows that are in the late calving groups they do show heat for shorter periods of time, so they may be more difficult to pick up. So just moving on to heifer management. And heifer management, sometimes it's really difficult during the breeding season to spend a lot of time with the heifers. But it is essential that breeding of heifers starts from the very beginning of the breeding season. This is important to ensure a compact breeding season that will maximize the calving rates and ensure that when these heifers calve down next year, and that they will be able to calve down in time so that they can go back and calf so that they can stay in the herd. We know that the heifers are going to be the high CBI stock on their farms, and that's why they should be targeted for high EBI AI sires for the target to generate breeding replacements. The heifers are also the most fertile animals on the farm, and because of this, they are particularly suited for the use of sex semen. And Stephen Butler will discuss this more in tomorrow's webinar. As I mentioned, there is a lot of work in breeding heifers during the breeding season, but we can use synchronization protocols to reduce the labor requirements and to increase the submission rates and in-calf rates. So I'm going to spend some time now going through a couple of protocols. So the first protocol just involves the use of prostaglandin, and this is the simplest and cheapest protocol to implement. But for this protocol to be effective, all heifers must be cycling, and it does involve the daily heat detection to pick up the heifers that are in heat. So with this protocol, excuse me, for the first week of breeding, all of the heifers should be inseminated as they come into heat. And 1/3 of heifers on average should come into heat during the first week. For the 2/3 of heifers that don't come into heat during the first week of the breeding season, these need to get 1 shot of prostaglandin. And they should come into heat within the next 2 to 5 days after that injection, and they should be inseminated. In some cases, there may be a small proportion of these heifers that do not respond to that first shot of prostaglandin. And for these heifers, they need to get a second shot of prostaglandin 11 days later and be inseminated 72 hours and 96 hours after that second shot of prostaglandin. And bear in mind, some of these heifers may not show any heat, but they should still be inseminated. So with this protocol, you can guarantee that all of your heifers will be inseminated within the first 21 days of the breeding season, but it allows for the majority of the heifers to be bred within the first 10 days. So the other option for synchronizing heifers is to use timed AI, and this protocol will be particularly suitable for heifers that are not yet cycling. So with this protocol, it allows for a timed AI and no heat detection is required. So it begins with the insertion of the progesterone device and a shot of GnRH. And then 3 days before AI and 2 days before AI, each heifer needs to get a daily shot of prostaglandin. And then 48 hours and the progesterone device must be removed, and that is essential to make sure that the heifers will come into heat and ovulate. But so 48 hours after that second shot of prostaglandin, the heifers can be timed AI'd, and at the same time they should get a shot of GnRH to ensure that they ovulate. So with this protocol, there are 4 interventions and 4 injections with 1 progesterone device. So just to finish up with the webinar and for the main points to take home. So high EBI cows and heifers should be targeted with high EBI AI sires to breed the next generation of replacements. For cows with uterine infections, these should be identified with the Metricheck device at least a month before mating start date and treated with an intrauterine antibiotic. Thin cows are cows with a body condition score less than 2.5, and they should be placed on once a day milking until at least 3 weeks after they have been submitted to maximize their chances of going in calf. For the non-cycling cows, the best way, the ways to identify them are either by tail paint, use of activity monitors, or a pre-breeding ultrasound scan. And these animals must be synchronized to maximize their chances of going in calf within the first 3 weeks. For the heifers, we strongly recommend that they are synchronized to maximize the submission rates and also in calf rates. And then during the breeding season, it is essential that there are at least 3 periods of heat detection with the use of heat detection aids to maximize the submission rates and in-calf rates. So that's it. So I'll be happy to take any questions there. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Stephen. So just while we wait for some questions to come in, there's been 1 or 2 around technical issues with the software, etc., coming in there. But while we wait for people to come in with questions, maybe I might just put a few to you.
Yeah, sure.
So the first one is, you said until at least 3 weeks after AI, once a day milking should be carried out on the thin cows. Is there anything that you would use as a kind of a decision support tool in terms of prompting you to return to twice a day milking with those?
Well, I guess the cows that go on body condition score, first of all, they need to be that low body condition score. They're thin. They need to be easily identifiable in the parlor. So because they are going to go into the parlor at both times, and they need to continue to get both feeds of nuts morning and evening to make sure that they're high plane in nutrition. They need to be identified either by tape on the tail or a strap on the leg. Once they are submitted, it would be a good idea to obviously paint them and mark them, and a good idea would be to have put them up on the notice board in the parlor, and maybe even set alerts on the phone to identify when they will be at least 3 weeks past. But I guess the main thing is to show that they have actually increased their body condition as well.
Okay, so that would be one of the key criteria as well. So if they were still looking like they were lagging behind the rest of the herd in terms of body condition, you'd continue to milk them once a day, just to be doubly sure, I suppose, that they're going to hold in calf to the service, is it?
Perhaps. I mean, I guess if you're happy that they haven't come back into heat 3 weeks after that AI, then you can be reasonably sure until you do an early pregnancy check that they are in calf.
Okay. So, okay, so we have 2 questions in there at the moment now, Stephen. So is there any negative impact to the natural cycle of the animal using these methods, is one question.
Okay, so for that question, the short answer is no, there is not.
Very good. If cows start, once a day again, Stephen, if cows start leaking from the sound of milking machine, milk or leave it off?
Yeah. You know, I guess, look, at the end of the day, if the udder is under real pressure, then once they may not be sustainable for those individual cows. And if they're, I guess, if the cows are showing a lot of discomfort, then it may not be a suitable option for them to increase the body condition on those animals.
Yeah.
Sorry, Stuart. Can I come in on that one? Just
Donal,
from a practical level. Look, at most cows will do that for a couple of days. You know, the first couple of days you put them on once a day. I know what Stephen's saying. If they're very, very high milk yield cows, yeah, possibly it's just not sustainable. But most cows will leak a little bit. So I'd give them 2 or 3 days, and they usually will settle down. And the other thing is just take a look and make sure they're not cell count problem cows before you do that. Put them on once a day initially, and if they're not, you know, within a couple of days they generally will settle down and they won't leak in the evening milking.
Yeah, I'd concur with that, Donal, as well. I think they get into the system of it basically quite easily, and I suppose the mistake that can be made is if they're not identified clearly and they get milked in the evening milking, it just throws them off kilter. So it's important that they're well marked and well identified. and that everybody's clear that they're only to be milked. And sometimes people want to do that once a day milking in the evening for some reason maybe, or instead of the morning, or vice versa, so that it's clear what milking is the once a day milking. The other thing is, generally the leaking of milk isn't a huge issue, especially now at this stage of the year. It's a bigger issue in February, March, maybe when cows are in on cubicles, etc. So the opportunity for, or if they do leak milk, yes, there's milk leaking onto the ground that you'd prefer was going into a bull tank maybe, but it's not the end of the world in that the cows will seal up or close up naturally again once they're gone away from the milking parlour. Their teat canals will close as normal and they'll be fine again until later on. So we've a good few questions coming in. So there's one: can heifers be synced without the use of the seeder? I think we should, that you just might address that again there, Stephen.
Yeah. Well, if you don't want to use the progesterone devices, you can stick with the synchronization just using the.
So we seem to have a problem with Stephen's audio there at the moment. So to answer the question, it is feasible to synchronize heifers without a seeder. I suppose the seeder is used in the situation to control the timing of AI, so that it's very organized and structured, whereas syncing heifers with just prostaglandin only, which is feasible with just injections, double injection situation as well, but it means that there's probably more variability in the times of heifers coming into season for to be AI'd, so that there's probably more AI days required, so more runs in and out of the handling facility in order to actually AI the heifers. So just while we're waiting there for Stephen to maybe pick up again, there's a question here: what to do with cows that come bulling in the week before you start breeding? Should you bring them back in heat earlier?
Stuart,
Stephen,
can
you're
you hear
back
me?
again. Yeah, I hear you now.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Okay. So sorry.
Yeah,
question,
I answered that question in relation to the heifer synchronization anyway, so it is feasible to do it without the seeder as well. And then the next question is what to do with cows that come bulling in the week before you start breeding. Should you bring them back in heat earlier? So that's similar to an article that was in the journal in the Haw in New Zealand, is what kind of the high weight protocol, I think they call it.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. I mean, if you have been keeping good records of pre-breeding heat detection, the use of the prostaglandin can be used to bring the cows in 1 week earlier. To be honest, we don't have any good data where we have evaluated that system ourselves, but it will as you said, should bring in the cows in heat 1 week earlier than they would be expected. And if they come into heat, their fertility should be as good as if they had been left to run until the 3rd week of the breeding season.
Okay, so I'll just take a few more questions here. So the one is, would it be better to, should late calving cows be put on once a day regardless of body condition score?
In general, the late calving cows are not going to be thin. They're usually quite fat since they've been dry since December. Also, with late calving cows, they are they're calving down in March, April, when grass supply is much greater than compared to thin cows that have calved down in February. So while putting them on the late calvers on once a day, it for sure it will help them to start cycling quicker. But it's I guess it's an option that can be pursued. It will one of the benefits will be that it will reduce particularly for the fatter cows, it will reduce the level of body condition score that they do lose when they calve down.
Okay, and a good question here. If cows are cycling, can you generally take it that they are okay in terms of uterine infection, or should you still check up on, we'll say, your problem cows a bit? That was a question I was going to ask as well. Have you actually done any research, Stephen? Maybe you haven't. If you, in terms of a control group of problem cows, if you left them alone and never interfered with them or never checked them, did they fare out okay, or does their calving interval increase, and is it important to intervene with those in particular?
Okay, so I guess first of all, to get to the start of the question, but if they are cycling, should you consider that they are okay and fit for breeding? And probably the answer to that is no. That if just because they are cycling, they still may have a uterine infection, and so those animals should still be Metrichecked. If in regards to the group of cows that you may have identified that had difficult calving or mastitis, or milk fever or grass tetany during the springtime, if those animals are cycling and if they don't have a uterine infection, then there is you can assume that they are ready for breeding.
Okay. And another good question here, any merit, I suppose, just to clarify it for people on the meeting, any merit to AIing twice a day as opposed to once a day?
So the studies that have shown with large numbers of herds that there is no difference in pregnancy rates between herds that do once a day AI versus twice a day AI. However, particularly if you want to use sex semen, having the option to do twice a day AI would increase the number of animals that would be suitable for sex semen, because the key thing with sex semen is that they are AI'd 14 to 20 hours after they come into heat. So based on when they come into heat, particularly if they come into the heat you're only seeing them come into heat in the morning time. If you're doing twice a day AI, they would also be suitable for sex semen use or to be inseminated with sex semen in the evening also.
Okay, they're flying in here, Stephen, so we'll keep going if Donal's okay with hanging on there for another while. Would you just clarify, are you saying that you should Metricheck all cows, is one question that's come in here?
Yes, yeah, we should, yeah. All cows should be Metrichecked. A good time to do it is 1 month before mating start date. This gives time for the cows with a uterine infection to be identified and treated, okay? However, there will obviously be cows that, when you do the first Metricheck, they may not be calved very long, or they may not have calved at all. So, as time progresses, maybe weekly or every 2 weeks, those animals should be Metrichecked, also those late calving animals. And if they are 2 to 3 weeks after calving and they have a uterine infection, those animals should also get the Metricheck, which is the intrauterine antibiotic.
Okay, so I'll just take another 3 questions here. So one that has been hanging in there with a bit, would you give cows that are calved 6 weeks with no heats showing a shot of Genstran now, mating start date the 23rd, so later this week? So it's a bit kind of like jump starting them, I suppose.
Okay, so Genstran, is that a prostaglandin, or is it a GnRH?
I'm assuming that it's a prostaglandin, Stephen. I don't know offhand.
Okay, yeah. So for cows that are not cycling, the use of prostaglandin will have no beneficial effect to getting them cycling. And for cows that are not cycling, they should be pushed on a synchronization protocol. Some people, now just to cover, in case the Genstran is a GnRH product, giving a GnRH to cows that are not cycling may get them to ovulate that follicle, but the best plan, but because you cannot guarantee that they will come into heat and ovulate, and it is best for those animals that are not cycling to be put on a fixed time protocol that will allow them 100% of those animals to be submitted.
Okay, and just Okay, I'll actually extend this to another one because it's kind of similar line to what you're saying there now in relation to fixed time protocols and so forth. So just a question in relation to CEDAR protocol for heifers. Is it always best to do 2 fixed time AIs, or could you inseminate to standing heat, and would it work as well?
When using the fixed time protocol, the heifers need only to be inseminated once.
Okay.
And with the protocol that I outlined, the heifers should not be coming in any earlier than the evening before insemination. Yeah.
Okay, and again on the heifer sync as well, for fixed time AI of heifers that are still pre-puberty, will they hold first heat, or is this the method to start them cycling?
So it will with the So first of all, those heifers should be on, if they haven't started cycling, they should be put on a rising plane of nutrition to make sure that they do start cycling soon. For the synchronization for timed AI, that protocol will get them cycling. And if they are inseminated, there is still a very good chance that they will go and calf.
Okay, and the final question then, I suppose, and it was one that I had on hand here in case people weren't as active as they have been with the questions, which is great. What's the added cost of the synchronization protocol, and I suppose the advantage of actually doing it? So there's probably a cost associated in the lactation year of 2020, but what's the advantage in terms of kickstarting these cows and reducing the numbers that are empty, suppose, at the end of the year potentially, and we'll say going once a day, etc. So there's a cost to all this intervention methods, we'll say, that we're going to employ in 2020, but what's the advantage of using them?
Okay, so for the timed AI protocol, the cost is going to depend, I guess, on the number of animals that are inseminated or that it's used on, and how good a deal that you can negotiate with your veterinary supplier. Obviously, the more animals you're doing, the better deal you're likely to get. The cost probably ranges from around 25 to 35 euro for the synchronization protocol that is for timed AI. The benefits of an intervention like the timed AI is you're gonna, okay, so there's a short-term cost in implementing it, but by ensuring that, so it should allow that the cows will calve earlier in the following year, which will allow a longer lactation and higher milk production. So that is the main benefit, obviously, of all these interventions to ensure that the cows go and calve quicker, is that you'll pull back their calving date the following year, and they should have a longer lactation with more milk production.
Very good. Right, so just in the interest of time, I'm going to move over to talk to Donal, and if we have time at the end, we might come back to answer a couple of questions that are still sitting there. So thanks very much, Stephen.
Okay,
very
great,
comprehensive and questions and answer session as well. Okay, so Donal, just to come to you now in relation to, you might just give an outline of what the situation has been this spring in Ballyhaise, how calving went for you, and we'll say, had you any issues, and we'll say, what are you doing to deal with the issues of with those issues or those problem cows, and then you might move on to cover when you're planning to start your breeding season and what you're doing in advance of it, and we'll say any decisions that you've made around breeding for this year. I think in our conversations earlier, you're talking about using some sex semen, so you might just touch on that, given that we'll be covering it in fair detail tomorrow. So I'll just hand over to you, so Donal, just for a couple of comments, please.
Yeah, Stuart. Yeah, so look at your spring 2020 is kind of a game of two halves as such. We had a very difficult wet February. Grazing conditions were very difficult. Barry would have managed to keep them out pretty much the whole way through, just with on-off grazing to keep grass in the diet. So look, I suppose that was right up until the middle of March. From the middle of March, it's just completely turned on its head. and ground conditions have dried up, and I suppose look at grazing conditions have been excellent in the last couple of weeks. So look at it went from being very, very difficult to quite easy in a short enough period of time. We might be a little bit different, I suppose, than the lads down south in terms of calving date. We do start a little bit later. And that's just matched, I suppose, to our grass growth curve. So look at, we sort of generally plan to start calving around about the 10th of February or thereabouts. So yeah, look at, in terms of issues, yeah, the issues were really in terms of getting grass into the diet, but we would have managed to do that fairly well. The fact that we were on off grazing pretty much the whole time till mid-March, we would have upped our supplementation a little bit, so we sort of just left it at a flat 4 kilos right up until probably two to 3 weeks ago. They're back down to 2 kilos now of concentrate. So I suppose, look at cows were in the main were fairly well fed. Problems in terms of problem cows, one of the issues we had this year was, and I think it's a common enough issue around the country, stock bull problem. So basically, we would have been using the sync program that Stephen was talking about, the initial one, the PG program for heifers, and then we would have put in stock bulls, mop-up bulls, and look at, we had issues with calving with 2 or 3 heifers, which is not ideal. So look at, those heifers were put on once a day fairly early on, along with a couple of thinner cows. So they're probably on once a day, 3 weeks now at this stage.
And did you have much? There was a very common problem across the entire country, was high levels of milk fever this year. Did you have any issues with that?
Not majorly. Look, we had a few cases, all right, in older cows and stuff. Not majorly, but we would have been. I suppose what Barry was doing was he was marking so each week or couple of days in the close-up pen, he would go through them and he'd just put a C with spray paint on the cows that needed calcium as they calved. And then whoever, because I suppose a bit like some of the bigger scale farms now, it's not just one person doing everything, it's kind of 2 or 3 people involved in terms of the calving process. So he would mark them with a large C on their side, and then if there was someone else calving the cow, they knew, right, this cow has to get a bottle. They bottled the cow and they put a mark through the C. So that actually worked quite well, I'd say, in terms of preventing that problem.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so just to move on then to, we'll say, when is your breeding start date and what have you started to do? And as you said, you're a little bit later starting than we would be down the south. Some herds have a lot of cows up around Cork City and so forth, and the earlier parts have a lot of cows served already. But in the main, it's probably next Monday is going to be the real start date in earnest for AI season down here.
Yeah.
With real kick off then for all herds by the start of the following week probably. So bank holiday, May bank holiday will be real start time. So what's your plan then, Donal, just for?
Yeah, well, just on that, I suppose, in terms of the start date and why we do that, we actually ran a trial for over a 3-year period, Stuart, looking at that for Ballyhaise, and we basically found that, and it's something I know, you said it there earlier on, some people are pulling their calving date back earlier and earlier, and that's fine if you've got plenty of grass in the system. But look at, I suppose we found for our growth rate, growth curve on the farm, look at, it's a slower farm to get going in the spring, that basically the group of cows that we calved early, basically they were being kept going on silage and meal, and we generally would end up sort of hitting the end of the first round and having to feed silage and meal for a week or 10 days then to get to the second round. So I suppose for anybody who sort of finds themselves in that situation, they probably should think about pulling their calving date back a little bit later. So look at the plan for this year is we're going slightly earlier, as I mentioned, because we're using a little bit of sex on cows. So we're starting sort of the 7th of May this year, and we'll generally do 11 weeks of breeding at that stage. Up until now, we've always done sort of 5 weeks dairy AI and then stock bulls after that, but we're going to change that around a little bit this year. In terms of what we've done so far, I suppose, look at, it's similar to what Steve said there. We've identified the non-cycling cows, we've identified the thin cows. guts of a month now at this stage, and they've been on once a day. We usually will do once a day on our late calving cows also, so whatever cows are calving towards the end, and tail paint went on the first week of April. So I suppose we kind of work a colour code system. Now some people don't bother to just paint them all the one colour. I would have always found it really helpful, because if nothing else, it's a kind of a constant visual reminder to yourself, look, there's cows that haven't even cycled yet and I'm 2 weeks into breeding or 3 weeks into breeding. So what we'll generally do is we tail paint everything red a month before we want to start breeding. And actually we would even paint the cows that haven't calved yet at that stage, which sounds like a stupid thing to do, but the reason we do that is if you don't do that, they tend to get missed then and not painted and stuff. So we just paint everything red. We come in then a week, 10 days before breeding. We'll pull out our cows that still have paint on, and also our problem cows. So some of them, as Stephen said, there would have cycled, but if they had issues with, you know, hard calvings or health cleanings or stuff like that, we pull them out, scan them, and they need to get, they will get. Now, in general terms, the level of intervention would be small enough. You know, 120 cows, you're probably talking about maybe 2 or 3 cows in that first run will have to get a cedar, and maybe another 6 or 7 will have to get washed out. But we're dealing with a fairly fertile herd of cows. What I would notice at farm level is there's a lot of lads out there that just don't have that, and they probably have to work harder than we do in terms of from the intervention side. So look, I suppose all you can do is do what you have to do to get as many of them cycling as you can.
Very good. So it's a good point that you make about even painting those cows that haven't even calved yet, because exactly as you said, they tend to slip through into the herd inconspicuously almost, and they head off out, and it's assumed that they're after being bred or whatever, and they just slip through the net. So I suppose if I'll take any questions there, I suppose Stephen, I might bring you back in there as well in terms of those April calvers, and we'll say what kind of success rate can we expect to achieve with the interventions that Donal has talked about there, with the likes of them as well, and that you've spoken about yourself already.
Yeah. So for the late calvers that are synchronized, obviously if they've, if the pregnancy rates to the timed AI really, if it's implemented properly, the conception rates should be as good as if those animals were not synchronized. So that will depend on your herd. If your average conception rates on your farm are maybe 55%, then you should be expecting a similar target for the heifers that are for the cows that are synchronized.
Okay, and a question to both of you, I suppose, in terms of, from my understanding, talking to the vets and so forth, they find the major fall or reason for failure in a lot of the synchronization protocols is that people fail to stick to the program properly. So have either of you any advice, I suppose, Donal, in a real life practical situation with the herd in Ballyhaise, and Stephen, from your experience doing research work with farms, is there one best way, or is there a particular way that's good for making sure that people stick to the plan, do everything on the day that it's supposed to be done, and maximize the return for the investment in the program in the first place?
Yeah, I suppose it goes without saying that the whiteboard beside where you're doing all this work is very handy. I suppose another little trick maybe is to use a bucket or receptacle or whatever for each individual cow. So you pick out whatever the protocol is. If it's a 10-day cedar and she has to get GnRH and cedar and whatever, you put everything that cow has to get into that one bucket or receptacle, and then as you go through the protocol what you've done, what you haven't done. I suppose as well as that, maybe we're kind of lucky in that we've got We've got automatic drafting where we can actually time ahead when those cows are pulled out, which is very handy. Look at the people that don't have that, you just can't do it. But that is one benefit of that. So we can actually, when we decide what we're doing, we can time ahead and say, look, she has to come out next Saturday morning, she has to come out Sunday morning again, and you can actually do that all in advance, which does make it easier.
Definitely. And have you any nuggets of information there, maybe, Stephen, that people could use to help them through the process that don't have the drafting gate like Donal is talking about there, which is a big advantage?
Yeah, I guess like in practical terms, it's really important that like these animals these cows are really easily identifiable, and that that you can notice them very easily from the rest of the herd. So using what we would normally do with these cows is maybe put a strip of tail paint across their backs up far enough that it won't be rubbed off by other animals. So particularly just being able to identify them really easily. Another thing is that if you think you're going to have a group of cows that are going to need synchronization, do them all at once. Don't have 5 cows synchronized, starting a synchronization this week, and then another 5 in towards a few days later. The best thing to do is just wait until they're all ready and synchronize them together. Because if you're giving different injections to different cows on different days, that's a recipe for disaster. Yeah, so I think those would be the main things to point out. I guess one thing I just didn't think of at the time when I was talking about the timed AI for the heifers and in the use of the progesterone device. Heifers tend a lot to be kind of playful and curious, and often when the string on the progesterone device is exposed, they can pull them out. So the best thing to do here is when the progesterone device is being inserted into the heifers, just to cut the string off, so that it won't be visible to the other heifers. The other thing is to know exactly the number of animals that you have put on the synchronization protocol. And, for example, then when it comes to the day that the progesterone device needs to be removed, if there's 10 cows synchronized, make sure that there are 10 seeders or prids pulled out on that day. Because if there's any of those progesterone devices left in that animal during the protocol, then that animal definitely will not come into heat or ovulate, regardless of what happens with the other injections.
Okay, very good. So just a question here for you, Donal. When is mating start date usually in Ballyhaise? Because the person asking the question is debating about pushing their mating start date to the 10th of May because they're in and they were home to calf.
Yeah, well, look, I suppose a useful guide and rule of thumb, really, Stuart, is to look at what's your magic date and come 60 days back earlier than that. And look, it took us probably 3 or 4 years or 5 years of running the system up there to really get a full handle on that. And our magic day for most years is around about the 15th of April. It's around about 10 days later than ER. So therefore, sort of 15th of February is kind of our normal, or what has become our normal start of calving. So that's what is, it's probably just 12th or 13th of May or something around that. So we're coming back maybe a week earlier or a little bit less than a week earlier. And that's just, it's not what we're using sexed across the whole herd, Stuart. We're just using sexed across a select number of cows that we want to breed off. And then within that cohort, the ones that suit sexed on the day. So, more than 60 days in milk, in good body condition, and that haven't had problems, the ones that tick all the boxes basically. So it's probably going to end up a small enough number of cows. So I don't think we have to overreact and go 3 weeks earlier than we normally would. So okay. That's generally speaking, that's would be sort of the middle of May we start breeding, the middle of April or February we start calving. And that kind of suits us fairly well.
Works generally most years.
Yeah, most years, I suppose. Look at, there's like this year now, for instance, we had to pull one paddock of the second rotation or the first rotation out for silage, But to be honest with you, I'd prefer to be in that position than every year running out of grass at the end of the first rotation. And that's, without getting into the too technical into it, really that's what you should be sort of asking yourself the question, do I keep running out at the end of the first rotation? And if you do, you probably need to start, pull your calving a little bit later. But the trend seems to be going the other way. But look at our research, and Brendan Horn would have done a similar trial actually in Moorepark, and basically didn't, calve cows earlier and didn't get any extra milk in the tank because it was being driven off silage and meal basically.
Yeah, and so it's actually appropriate, even though you're up the northern section of the country, the advice is probably quite appropriate for some farmers down the south as well, that if they are finding themselves in that situation, that they're running short, that their magic day isn't the 5th of April as they might be thinking. There's possibly scope for them to actually delay the start of their breeding season a little as well.
Yeah, and I suppose just on top of that, like I suppose, look, there's kind of 3 things that plays into that. Like the first thing is the growth rate or the growth potential of the farm, and that can vary. We actually have a guy here, David Brady, who's in the heavy soils program. He's only half an hour from Ballyhaise, but there's as much a difference between David and us as there is between us and Moorepark. So he's just higher and colder and wetter than we are.
Yeah.
So do you know what I mean? So there can be quite a bit of a difference actually in a small enough area. So your grass growth curve is one, your stocking rate's the second thing. So heavily stocked farms, it's going to be a bit later when they meet demand, and then the calving rate as well. And that's we were looking at some of the figures there Stephen was mentioning earlier. It is improving slowly. So maybe what you would have got away with a number of years ago, as calving's getting more compact, that's you're getting harder to get that 5th of April date. So it's just something to be aware of.
Okay, so we have 4 questions here, and I think we'll probably wrap it up then because we're just approaching 11 o'clock. So again, on synchronization again, Stephen. So for heifers, which synchronization program has the best conception rate if using sexed semen? The 2 PGs 11 days apart, or a cedar program?
So just to clarify, first of all, with the 2 PGs are only necessary for that's the second shot of prostaglandin is only necessary for the heifers that don't respond to the first shot of prostaglandin. But so we know that heifers that show heat obviously are going to have a higher likelihood of going in calf. So with the timed AI protocol, they will also show heat before the insemination. So there is not likely to be any difference in conception rates between either using the prostaglandin program or the timed AI. The main issue would be that the heifers, they are inseminated 12 to 20 hours after they start coming into heat.
Okay, and again, similar one in terms of heifers again. If they're all cycling, are the conception rates going to be better to a natural service rather, in terms of, I presume, an AI service at natural heat rather than intervening with an injection? I assume I'm interpreting that question correctly.
Right. Yeah. So for this regards the heifers, was it?
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. If the heifers are not cycling, then the best protocol is for the timed AI and definitely to use the progesterone device. They're not cycling. Yeah.
No, no, I think it's actually, we'll say, is it natural service? We'll say AIing to a natural heat, I suppose, I think is my interpretation of it.
Just Stuart, if I could come in on that one. Yeah. Look, we've kind of done it all the different ways, and our experience would be that conception rate is better to that natural service. Now slightly better, 5% or maybe 10% some years, but you'll get more heifers in calf in 3 weeks with the fixed time or the cedar type or the progesterone type program, where they're all coming basically on heat day 1. And I think that's the place where people don't realize that there's 2 big advantages of it in my book. Advantage number 1 is that it reduces the amount of labor involved in and out of heifers. Like for years, we've done that protocol that Stephen was talking about, where you AI for a week and then you hit the rest of them. So you're basically in and out for 10 or 12 days, and that's your busiest time AI in your cows as well. And you probably have synchronization with those late cows. So you have an awful lot going on in that first 10 days. Whereas with the seeder type program, you get it done on day one. You could actually do it a day before you start the cows if you want. So it just gets it out of the way. So that's advantage number one. Advantage number two is that you'll get more heifers calved in 3 weeks, even though the conception rate is slightly lower. So basically, the repeats, your repeat heifers will actually, 95% of them will be calved within the first 3 weeks of calving the next year. And the third benefit, which is completely underestimated in my book, is that it makes it practical to AI your repeats in the heifers. So basically you can, AI them, stick in a bull for up to 16, 17 days, pull the bull back out, put on scratch cards again, and watch them then for another 4 or 5 days. And you'll get somewhere around about 90 to 95% of your heifers in calf to dairy AI, which actually means that you can be much more selective on using dairy AI on your cows, which means you can use beef on the poorer cows, if you get what I'm saying. So in my book, that's the big advantage, is that you can actually, it makes it practical to AI the repeats, whereas with the other protocol, you just won't do it because there's just too much work involved, basically.
Yeah, it's just a concentrated period of observation required again there towards the latter part of or we'll say late 3 weeks, early 4th week of the AI season is what you're saying, which is a very valid point. And as you said, also breeding replacements from the heifers are going to mean better stock as well, obviously, than off the cow herd, and the opportunity to breed to beef then in the cow herd is increased significantly with a second round of AI in the heifers like that. Yeah, super. Just 2 final points, and we'll finish up then. Our two final questions. One is here, relates to a teaser bull, person using it for the first time, bringing the cows in once the teaser has been jumping on them the previous night for AI the following morning, but the teaser is still jumping on them after AI, and their question is, are they AIing too early? So I'll put that to you, Donal, I suppose. Maybe are you using the vasectomized bull in Ballyhaise?
That's one of the changes I suppose we're making this year, is that we're changing from using stock bulls, Stuart, which is what we would have done in the past, to using vasectomized bulls. So I suppose the reason for that is that I suppose we want to try and improve the quality of the beef calf coming from the herd, number one, and number two is to cut down on calving difficulty issues with stock bulls, because stock bulls can be a bit of an unknown quantity. And as well as that, the management around stock bulls getting cows and calf, I was on 4 or 5 different calls there last week with discussion groups, and a lot of guys had a great first 6 weeks, and then calving rate just collapsed, and that's basically the transition from AI to stock bulls. So I suppose the first thing with the vasectomized bull is you probably shouldn't go in at the start of breeding, because he's there to help you out when the activity reduces. So what I would say to anybody is that the first 3 weeks to 4 weeks, you're going to have no problem picking up cows, or you shouldn't have. There's going to be lots of activity. The issue really occurs, we'll say, after 3, 4, 5 weeks, if you're getting on well and you're getting the cows and calf. That next thing, there's not much activity. So the cow that would be mounted 10 or 12 times or whatever is only mounted once or twice, so the paint is not fully gone off her. And I think that's the time really to introduce the bulls. If you introduce them at the start, there is a danger that by the time you need them, they're fed up. They just got tired and fed up, and walking distances with larger herds, all that sort of stuff. So that would be the one thing I would say is put the bull in later in the season rather than at the start. In terms of then the timing of AI, they will tend to be fairly active in picking up the heat. So yeah, you're probably better to AI a little bit later. If you're going in AI and just when he's only, we'll say, showing interest, you probably are going in a little bit too early. But the main point from that, I would say, is pull him out and keep him in reserve for when it gets hard to pick up cows.
Okay, so that's perfect. Thanks very much. Just one point then as well, which might be useful for people, because I find in my experience that people have an issue with cows going in calf to these stock bulls later in the season that they didn't want, so they hadn't actually served them. And the next thing, the stock bull is left in and the cow is put in calf, and she stays around the following year again. So Stephen, there's a question here, a final question for you. You mentioned no heat if you forgot to remove the cedar from the cow. Could this be used to stop a cow due for culling running with a bull that you don't want to go in calf?
Yeah, yes, yeah. I mean, the progesterone device will stop them coming into heat. Yeah. I guess if that's the plan that you plan to implement, it would probably, and you definitely don't want those heifer and cows to come into heat. The progesterone device may need to be replaced every few weeks.
Okay, and then just one cost-conscious person here is asking, could the PRID that was used on heifers be reused again in problem cows?
So we haven't done any work evaluating that. And their recommended labeled uses are for single use.
Okay. Okay, so look, we'll just have to wrap it there. I'd like to thank Stephen and Donal for their contributions today. We'll be back again here tomorrow from 10 to 11, focusing on sex semen with Stephen Butler, and we'll be talking to Jim White and Mullinahone, who has quite successfully used sex semen protocols with the last number of years. So thank you for joining us. We look forward to having you back with us tomorrow, and thanks for your interaction with some great questions there, and thank you to the lads again for your participation. So thank you.